Hi, this is Amanda Rowland, and I just want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. And basically, what I'm going to walk through is just how to participate today. And once we walk through that, then we'll actually start with Rebecca Martin. So everyone should see how to participate today in front of them. And basically, what you're going to want to do is have your audio mode on, whether you're using your telephone or your mic and speakers. Again, I'm going to click through this, and we'll get started. So you should be able to see how to open and close your panel. Also, if you want to view, select, and test your audio, you'll notice right now that as attendees you are muted. There is an option to enter some questions within your panel. You can raise your hand. And basically, you'll receive an email about the recording of this once we're all done. Okay? All right. So Rebecca Martin, if you want to take over my webinar here. And again, thank you all for participating today.
Thank you, Amanda. Good afternoon. I'm Rebecca Martin, Vision Process Coordinator for the National Wildlife Refuge System. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining our webinar today on Conserving the Future, which is an ongoing public input process that was launched by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Wildlife Refuge Association to build a new, bold vision for the National Wildlife Refuge System. Today's program is designed to inform service employees, the public, friends, organizations, and partners about this process and encourage you to participate by visiting americaswildlife.org. You still have time to get involved. You have until Earth Day, which is this Friday, April 22nd, to make your voice heard. During today's webinar, we will introduce you to the Conserving the Future process, showcase the americaswildlife.org website, and then have an opportunity to talk with several members of core teams who have joined us today to hear more details about the draft vision and the ongoing conversations that are taking place at americaswildlife.org. As a brief overview, this draft vision document is a proposal that is wide-ranging in scope and has a high-level organizational perspective of what the service and its partners should aim to achieve with regards to wildlife conservation into the future. The start of the vision building began with 5 core teams composed of about 70 service employees focused around issues regarding conservation planning and design, conservation delivery, conservation science, relevance to a changing America, and leadership and organizational excellence. Since July 2010, these 5 teams have been working on draft vision reports that were consolidated into a single draft vision document that is available online right now at americaswildlife.org until Friday, Earth Day, April 22nd. Again, this is a draft document, and that's why it's being shared. We need to hear from you. I'll turn things over now to Michael Gale, Vision Process Communications Coordinator, who's going to take a minute and showcase americaswildlife.org for you and show you the opportunities that exist there for you to get involved. Michael.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. So hey, folks. My name is Michael, and I'm the Vision Communications Coordinator, like Rebecca said. And folks right now should be able to see the website that we have put together at americaswildlife.org, working with our partners at the National Wildlife Refuge Association. And before Earth Day, there's a couple primary ways in which you can engage. So first, the place to find the draft vision is right here from the home page. You can click on Draft Vision, or right here under Find Out More on Comment on the Draft Vision. And that takes you to an introduction where you can download a PDF if that's the best way for you to read the document, or you can read it chapter by chapter, scan the table of contents, find a subject matter area that resonates with you, And again, you can comment right down here on the bottom. Here, it's sort of like a blog if anyone's ever commented on a blog. If you're logged into the social network, you'll be ready to go and can comment, and you're not logged into the social network, that's fine. We still want to hear from you. Just give us your name and email address, and you'll be set to go, which is really just to protect us from robots and things like that. The other way that you can comment, again, is that if you don't want to comment directly on the pages within the website, you can just send us an email at comment@americaswildlife.org. And again, send us an email before this Friday. The other tool that we have to collect your ideas about the future of the National Wildlife Refuge System and America's Wildlife is this what we call the Bold Ideas Forum, which is a really open forum and tool where anyone can submit new ideas that they have, but can also comment on other people's ideas. So just click on the Bold Ideas Forum option from the home page, and it takes you here. And again, to enter a new idea, you just click your cursor here and start typing in your new idea. And it will sort of trigger you to see if there's other new ideas available. And if not, you just click this button that says Create a New Idea, and pop, it'll be joined into the forum. So there's lots of other kind of really neat and fun activities on the website. If you click on Community and go down from there, you can see our social network. We have a Go Green page. We started going to be starting a new book club called America's Wild Read. And there's a youth contest for young people to submit multimedia submissions about their perspectives on the future of wildlife conservation in America. So check out the website again. You have until Friday, and also check us out on Facebook and Twitter. So thanks so much. And Rebecca, I am going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Michael. We're really fortunate today to have with us members of each of the core teams here in studio as well as on the phone line to talk about their experiences during this process and some of the content of the draft vision document. Today in studio we have Noah Kahn and Brian Salem. Noah is the performance manager for the Refuge System and serves on our conservation planning and design core team. Hi Noah, thanks for being with us. Brian Salem is the Refuge Law Enforcement Officer at Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge and is here representing the Conservation Delivery Core team. Brian, good to see you. On the phone we have Heather Abbey, who serves on our Conservation Science team. Hi Heather. Hi there. Bridget Fahey from Relevance to a Changing America. Hello Bridget.
Hey folks, good to be with you.
And Jose Viramontes, who's a member of the Leadership and Organizational Excellence team and is also a liaison to the Conference and Report Steering Committee. Hi, Jose.
Hello.
Welcome to all of you, and welcome to our viewers. Thank you all for taking time out of your day to join this conversation. We're going to go ahead and get started, and just as a quick overview, we're going to take about 20 minutes to talk about a couple of things within the vision and the process that folks have been working through. And then for the second 20 minutes of the webinar, we're going to turn it over to you all and take questions from you all, and you can submit them through your webinar forum. So I'm going to start the conversation with you, Noah, and ask why you decided to get involved in the Conserving the Future vision process for the Refuge System.
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's a really cool opportunity for an early career person like myself, and because I'm in my early career and I intend to carve out a career with the Refuge System or within the Fish and Wildlife Service in one of the programs, and because this process has the potential to shape Refuge System priorities and Refuge System direction for the foreseeable future, it's just a really good opportunity as an early career professional to get involved and help shape that. So it's a really great opportunity. And then if you allow me to geek out for a second, I'm someone who believes in promoting efficiencies and improving programs and good governance, and this is also an opportunity for me to get involved in that way. So that's why.
Thanks, Noah. And Noah does work for the Refuge System, but we have many core team members who don't, who work within other programs in the Fish and Wildlife Service. And Heather, you're on the phone, but you work in an Ecological Services Field office. And why did you feel it was important to be a part of this process for the future of the refuge system?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Well, I think that the National Wildlife Refuge System is really one of the most effective tools that we have for the conservation of America's imperiled species and habitats. And, you know, with the steady increase in habitat conversion, invasive species, fragmentation, and all the rapid changes that are expected to result from climate change, I think that we're really looking at a whole new level of complexity with the design, management, and long-term viability of our refuges. So I felt that the issue of how to adapt our conservation strategy to this change is just really one of the most important challenges and opportunities that we will face in this decade. And it just really seemed like a great opportunity to apply my conservation planning background to make a positive contribution to the future of conservation within the service and beyond.
Thank you, Heather. Heather mentioned changes, and Bridget, your team, Relevance to a Changing America, has spent a great deal of time talking about that changing America, and Heather was specifically referencing climate change, but Bridget, what are some of the changes that kind of fall under that changing America that your team talked about that really led to this vision process?
Well, we talked a lot about the changing demographics in America. So America is becoming increasingly an older population, a more urban population, and more culturally and ethnically diverse. So we really thought a lot about how we can keep our existing partners, but also expand our partnerships into some of those areas and respond to those changing needs of America.
Great, and I know some of the things that you all talked about in that urban piece were also new technologies and kind of people being connected. And Brian, during this process, we have employed a lot of new techniques and maximized social media opportunities. Talk about your experience in using these tools to encourage conservation conversations, especially at americaswildlife.org, among a number of different audiences.
Sure, Rebecca. Yeah, like you said, it's been very good, and the social media has been nothing short of outstanding, and that's really a tribute to the National Wildlife Refuge Association and you and Michael Gale and everyone else involved. Just the ideas, the bold ideas section, the blog, it's just been very good. We've gotten a lot of good ideas, and I know my team, the delivery team, is really looking forward to getting those ideas in a format and probably incorporating many of them into the document. And just the more voices we can get in this document, the better and more powerful this document's going to be. And the social media really has just been a great way to get everyone's views from employees, partners, friends, everyone really, and even stakeholders. It's just been very, very good. And you know, also I think the social media is not going to go away. I mean, this is a starting point. It's been great for this process, but you know, like LCCs, they could have their own internet sites and blogs and bold ideas as well. And it would just be, you know, internet sites and social media is going to be here to stay. And it's a great way to get partners and stakeholders, get all their comments, and also a good way to have them be kept in the loop. So I think it's been a very positive thing.
Good. Glad to hear that. Thanks, Brian. Jose, Brian was just talking about partners, and that leads right into what I was going to ask you about. In your day job, Jose, you spend a lot of time working with external audiences. Why is it important for our partners, our friends, the public, everyone to get involved in this process and opportunity to shape the future of the refuge system?
Well, that's a good question, Rebecca, and one that, you know, the simple answer is because the refuge system belongs to them as much as it belongs to those of us employees that are here working to craft that vision. That's something that's very exciting about working in public service, is that the efforts that we put into on the ground, whether it be at a national wildlife refuge or in regional offices or in headquarters, they translate directly into benefits for the American public at large. And so our partners have a key role in helping us decide how to move forward. I mean, there's a whole core group associated with relevancy to and changing America. We have a tendency, and I'd say this government-wide, to sort of get good at what we're good at doing and just keep doing it, but we have to stop every now and then and ask ourselves, is this still relevant to the public that we're here to serve? And so having partners involved like the National Wildlife Refuge Association and the states, as well as just concerned citizens out there, their input into this process is extremely valuable, and it's something that's going to give the division products moving forward much more credibility and make it much more implementable, I would say.
Great. Well, now that we've gotten a little introduced to everyone, I'm going to open up a couple of questions for anyone to jump in on. I think we have some viewers who may have seen a lot about the vision document on americaswildlife.org, but we have others who may not have been able to take much time to dig into it. So let's start by talking about some of the big ideas. And Brian, I can start with you. What is a big idea, maybe one that generated the most discussion within your team that's currently in the draft vision?
Yeah, I'd say a very big idea for the delivery team is ecological resilience, and that would be the ability of ecosystems to withstand disturbances and reorganize while undergoing change, so to retain essentially the same function. And with climate change and all the other stressors that come along with climate change, we're going to see an acceleration in those stressors. And I think a big idea of the delivery team was to support this ecological resilience. So we're managing 4 native species that are resilient to climate change, to all the other stressors, sea level rise that accompany it. And then also restoration. We defined restoration a little differently than what you would normally think of when you think of restoration. And we said to replace highly altered landscapes with native communities to create best current and future habitat for trust species. And also they would be resilient instead of just going back and perhaps making, trying to bring it back to what it was. We're actually managing 4 resilient habitats.
That's really interesting. I think several of the teams talked about that restoration technique where restoration isn't always going back to historical conditions, especially in light of climate change. And I know climate change was something that all of the teams talked about in one way or another. And Heather, on the science team, a lot of these came out, but your team had a little bit of a different take by focusing on science. And can you talk about one or more of the big ideas that the science team really brought forward in your discussions?
Sure. Yeah, I think it was really summed up best in our team's vision statement, which emphasized the agency's commitment to scientific excellence, which is demonstrated by application of sound science to refuge management, implementing a robust inventory and monitoring program, developing and clearly articulating deliberate research agendas, and fostering communication and collaboration with multiple partners on topics which were spanning large spatial scales and landscapes. And so really it comes back to this whole idea of, that science underpins management decisions, directs strategic growth, and integrates with broader landscape conservation efforts in response to climate changes and other regional stressors. I don't think that anyone would really question that sound science should be involved in everything that we do. But rather, really the question is, how do we ensure consistent implementation of science and transparency across the refuge system and demonstrate what we like to refer to as a commitment to scientific excellence that permeates and transcends everything that we do in the refuge system.
That's, I think, a very worthy goal, and has received much positive feedback on the website. Heather, you mentioned strategic growth, which is something, Noah, that the planning team talked extensively about. And why did your team feel it was important to cover strategic growth, and kind of what were your thoughts as you all drafted that piece of the document?
Yeah, that's actually something we spent a lot of time on. And, in thinking about all the tools that we have to conserve wildlife, we kind of lumped them all into this umbrella term that we called collaborative landscape protection. And strategic growth, which might be more narrowly defined as sort of fee title acquisition of lands or acquiring easements on lands, is just one part of that. So it's just one part of all the tools that we have, and those might include landowner incentives, working with your neighbors, Maybe we partner up better in the future with the Services Coastal Program, the Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program. Maybe it means we align our programmatic goals with the Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Services Farm Bill programs. And then there's the easement and fee title acquisition portion of what we can do to conserve wildlife. And so that's strategic growth. One of our biggest ideas in making that growth more strategic was to overhaul sort of the decision model that we now have called LAPS, Land Acquisition Prioritization System. And an overhaul of LAPS might not steer too far away from the bread and butter, like the migratory birds and endangered species that we want to seek benefit for when we're looking to acquire land, but it would also include new things like evaluating a parcel on its connectivity potential to connect, core protected areas. It might evaluate a parcel on its role in an ecological or regional context, or its susceptibility to climate change, or maybe even add an urgency index, like how imminent is the threat to that parcel. How many partnership opportunities are there? So we could go on, but the point is if we were to develop a decision analysis tool that included all of those things, growth in the refuge system in the future would be more strategic.
It's a great section of the document. If you haven't checked it out, you definitely should. Noah mentioned several times partners, and when the core teams submitted their original reports, every core team had a section in there on partners. Why, folks, was this so important to talk about partners and partnering and working beyond wildlife refuge boundaries? And I'll start this question with Bridget, but I'd like to hear from several of the teams. But Bridget, in talking about beyond refuge boundaries, your team talked at length about urban refuges and having an urban refuge presence. And you live in Lakewood, Colorado, Denver area where we have an urban refuge, Rocky Mountain Arsenal National Wildlife Refuge. Why was your team, why did this, why was it so heavily discussed by the relevance team?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. This is definitely one of the more richer areas of dialogue that our team had. So we asked ourselves the question, how can we best serve this changing America? And as I talked about before, it's a population that's becoming older and increasingly urban. So we looked overall for more opportunities to get people to our wildlife refuges, but we also looked for opportunities to bring our wildlife refuges to the people where they are. And urban refuges can be a part of that vision. But as you know, this is an area of debate. There's a lot of critiques of urban refuges. The lands can be expensive. Not all urban areas might have high quality wildlife habitat. So we talked about some more innovative ways of connecting with people in the cities, of perhaps having kiosks at some more local state and city parks that can direct them sort of out to some of our more remote refuges, but also having virtual refuges. We talked about using technology and lots of different ways to bring our message to where the people are if we can't get the people out to our refuges.
Great. And that certainly has been a subject of much controversy and discussion, as Bridget was saying, especially on the website, as we're continuing to see. Continuing on that vein of partners, Heather, your team, the science team, talked about science. You talked a little bit about citizen science, as well as collaborating and contributing and communication in science. And so what was the role, what do you all see the role of partners is in conservation science for the refuge system?
Yeah, I think that was definitely something that was really emphasized throughout the science team chapter. And so much so, actually, that we finally decided it was appropriate to break it off as its own subheading within the chapter, which we entitled Communication, Collaboration, and Contribution in Science. And really, partnerships and collaboration are essential to everything that we do here at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we can't accomplish our conservation goals alone. Rather, We need to combine our efforts with others and work with the public wherever possible to make these goals a reality. So, I mean, really getting, the most bang for our buck and working together with other experts in other fields and sharing our data as well as, hopefully being able to get some of their knowledge and incorporate it into our plans and our projects is just invaluable. We need to really foster those partnerships in order to make our projects work.
Thanks, Heather. And certainly in science, partners are essential. They're also essential on the ground, as we've all seen, and many of you have probably experienced. The more entities, folks, organizations that you can have work on something, often the more successful it is. And Brian, on the delivery team, you all talked a lot about what conservation delivery looks like, and how do partners play into conservation delivery for the refuge?
We did talk a lot about that and spent a good amount of time focusing on partners. And basically we can do everything else in this that this document says. We can do it perfectly, but if we don't utilize partners and take that big landscape approach, we're not going to be as effective as we could have been. But also, I'd like to mention the National Conservation Strategy, and that's defined as working with partners and local communities to develop and implement innovative conservation techniques across federal, state, public, and privately owned lands to effectively and efficiently manage species, habitats, and ecological services. And it's a very bold idea, perhaps the boldest idea in this document, and it can't be done without partners. We absolutely need to use partners, involve stakeholders, friends groups, and it really can't be understated on the delivery side of things.
Thanks, Heather. Not to pick on you, but Brian jumped right into the National Conservation Strategy, and you were part of the sub-team from multiple different core teams who worked on drafting that. Is there anything you'd like to add to Brian's comments on the National Conservation Strategy?
Sure. Well, that was something that, I think everybody involved in this process just felt that it was really important to include in the document. And the National Wildlife Refuge System Improvement Act of 1997 actually directs the Secretary of the Interior to plan for the continued growth of the National Wildlife Refuge System. And with all the myriad of increasing threats, we've got environmental change, urban development, and associated habitat loss and fragmentation, it really makes little sense to undertake strategic growth planning process for the refuge system in a vacuum. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service really just needs to move quickly to involve partners and develop a collaborative landscape-level strategy that can effectively focus all of our conservation delivery actions to achieve a shared vision for conservation. And so I think, an integral part, as Brian kind of mentioned, of designing and implementing this strategy involves working with partners, local communities to develop and implement innovative conservation techniques across federal, state, public, and privately owned landscapes. And so, I think this overall, this is just a really important concept to kind of get across in the document.
And I think the teams, you're right that each team was heavily involved in discussing the National Conservation Strategy and starting to put that together. And I just want to comment, several people have mentioned implementation, and we'll certainly emphasize this again at the end, but after this process is over and we finish the public comment period and we have a renewed vision for the refuge system, it is all about implementation and making those changes so that we become the refuge system of the future that's described in our draft vision document. And one of the things that, implementing has already started to occur a little bit is the refuge system doing some greening, becoming more green both in infrastructure and in its operations. And Jose, the leadership team in the later chapters of the document have some language about greening. Why is it important for the Fish and Wildlife Service and the refuge system to think about becoming more green in its activities?
Well, there's the old saying, what you do speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you're saying. And I would think that, as the premier conservation agency, and this is something that sort of echoed throughout our core team, with it as the premier conservation agency, we have not only a responsibility but a strong interest in presenting a green front and doing the things that that we're asking others to do ourselves, whether that be even here with the vision planning process itself, where we're meeting more and more through webinars and through increased use of technology to help decrease our carbon footprint, or on our individual refuges, where we are going towards not only just recycling programs, but also utilization of more hybrid vehicles and new technologies, where we can do our job more efficiently with our energy consumption and with the footprint we leave on the ground. So it's a big part of leadership for the Fish and Wildlife Service more broadly, is to use the refuge system, which is our largest land base, as an example to the other agencies as well as to the American public of how this can be done without having a significant impact on our day-to-day operations.
Absolutely. Well, enough with the easy questions. We're going to see what some of our folks who are viewing this would like to hear today. So we have some questions that have been posed.
Yeah, Rebecca, it's been great. This is Michael. I'm behind the scenes in the moderator panel. We have loads of questions via the questions box that people have submitted. Again, folks on the webinar can use the panel to submit questions. And then we have a smaller number of people who have raised their hands who are going to try to unmute. And that's what we'll start with. Julie Katz or Kate has a question for the panel. And Julie, we have unmuted you, so give it a try and see if we can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I want to first just thank all of you for your hard work on this. I'm sure it's an incredible effort. The question I have is, one thing I was concerned about in reading the draft document was the statement that the appropriate uses policy should be interpreted more flexibly. And I guess this is a question for Bridget. I was wondering what uses did the group think should be allowed that aren't currently allowed? And I guess if you interpret that policy more flexibly, how would you prevent abuse of it?
Yeah, we had an awful lot of discussion about the appropriate use policy, and I'm not in the refuges program, so I didn't know anything about the policy, so I was learning about it for the first time. But our conversation centered around trying to be more inclusive, so where we can say yes to our community, to say yes, because we realize that we are part of the local communities which we serve, and it's important for us to have their support, and we feel like they'll be committed to our future if they see some tangible benefits to their communities from our refuge system. So we didn't want to ever get in a situation where we would allow something that wasn't compatible with wildlife conservation and our mission, but we did talk about if there were some uses where we could build conservation partnerships, we would look at that as a value that those partnerships would bring to us too, so maybe a little more broadly. So we talked about some things like local running races that we could have on refuges. Weddings, I think, were one of the things that we get asked for an awful lot, and I think there's no real consistency as to when we say yes or no. And I think what we talked about is where these uses could be done compatibly with wildlife conservation, but could help us form bridges to our local communities and increase the folks that are committed to our lands, that would be a positive thing. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, that answered my question. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Julie. And now I'll just read a question. There's a lot of them, again, coming in from the chat. So we got a couple process questions, Rebecca, so maybe I can throw those to you real quick. John has asked, what's the rationale for a 10-year vision versus, say, a 15-year vision? Seems like an enormous effort for a relatively short time.
That's a great question, John. And I think although sometimes we talk about a 10-year vision, what we really ask the core teams to think about, and what we internally have spent a lot of time thinking about, is more where the refuge system needs to be further down the line. And I think this draft document really gets us through the first kind of push of that. If you look back at our history, in 1998, we published Fulfilling the Promise, which followed the National Wildlife Refuge System Improvement Act, and that document has served us well, led us well into in 2010, 2011, but certain things needed to change. And so while we are doing that future thinking, really thinking about, further down the line, we recognize that a document like this could certainly run into snags or challenges or other issues, things that we just can't foresee. A perfect example from Fulfilling the Promise is that climate change was certainly not a threat as it is today, and so wasn't discussed in that document.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Another question we have from the chat, Tricia asks, what specific strategies are you considering to re-engage people with wildness? Would it be possible to develop a program to offer unstructured time in wildlife refuges for young children? This could work in concert with the current movement to bring children back into the forest after a generation of isolation that has resulted in nature deficit disorder. So maybe for the whole panel or Bridget specifically, I don't know if folks have a particular reaction.
Well, our chapter of the document talks a lot about what the wild places do to sort of restore the spirit of people and how we can reduce stress and anxiety and allow for those unstructured times for children. We didn't include any specifics on how we would achieve that, but we did value that as a benefit that our refuges can provide to people.
Great, thanks. Brian has a question about the Bold Ideas Forum. Raise awareness of the trade-off between economic growth and wildlife conservation is the leading bold idea, and partners seem to be supportive of this. How will we address this trade-off in the vision and in maybe the Conserving the Future conference in Madison, outreach, roundtables, and et cetera?
It's a great question. The Bold Ideas Forum has just been an incredible tool where we've gotten close to 200, I think, bold ideas so far. The core teams are currently looking at those and meeting this week, actually, meeting virtually, but to discuss bold ideas and comments that have been coming in. One thing that we have recognized is that through the Bold Ideas Forum, there are a lot of ideas that are great ideas that the refuge system and the service should definitely pursue, but they may or may not fit well into this draft vision document. And so we are keeping track of all bold ideas. A lot of them may be actually part of implementation strategy or implemented in other ways outside of just the draft vision.
And if I could ask for the core team members, did the issue of economic growth ever come up in your discussions, either in the conservation or people teams, and how that might have impacts to wildlife and habitat?
Yeah, this is Noah from Conservation Planning. I think many people in the agency recognize that there may in fact be a trade-off between pursuit of economic growth and certain wildlife conservation practices. But for those of us involved in this process today, we are not necessarily at the decision-making level of agency prioritization setting. And to tackle a large and potentially controversial issue like that involves agency leadership and agency decision-making. And so I hate to punt, but like our esteemed president said a few years ago, that's above my pay grade.
Thanks, Noah. Karen has a question about the strategic growth section. The following statement appears in that section of the vision document. Moving forward, the service's attention to strategic growth will be on a scale commensurate with the seriousness of the development trends that threaten to undermine more than a century's worth of conservation. So in keeping with this statement, maybe as a follow-up to the economic discussion, do you see the designation of nearly 2 million acres that are currently recommended for wilderness designation as part of a viable strategy to grow the refuge system? And I should also mention there is a wilderness-specific section of the vision document. Any thoughts on wilderness and strategic growth?
Yes. So one of the things I've noticed, and I should back up and say that prior to me joining the Fish and Wildlife Service a couple years ago, I worked in the nonprofit conservation field. And so I think because of my background and maybe just because of my predisposition to such things, I really value input, and I believe that there's a lot of gains that can be made from government listening to outside partners. So I've been following the Ideas Forum, and what I've noticed is that there seems to be a lot of support for the notion of reassessing the wilderness stewardship policy that the Fish and Wildlife Service published, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I think that in our conversations over the next few months, because the public and employees are telling us that it's worth considering and that it might, in fact, should be a priority, I think that it merits consideration. So yes, I mean, I think wilderness stewardship is something we need to take a look at. If there's ways we can improve our management approach or even formal policy, I think it's worth doing. We'll see how it plays out.
Great, thanks, Noah. Jeremy has a question. Maybe Jose, I'll throw this to you on the phone. Jeremy asks, what's the role of advocacy, or I'll say non-government organizations, in this effort, and how can we help the Fish and Wildlife Service make the most out of this plan and the vision as we move forward?
That's a good question, and I think at this point, at least for the remaining days until the 22nd, one of the strongest advocacy roles that our partners could play is reaching out to your organization and your membership base to take a look at the document and offer their comments and bold ideas to help us move forward. After that, though, a big part of the partnership effort and integration is going to be in the implementation phase, and a lot of these new measures that are being identified and these bold ideas that are being thought of, and as everybody's mentioned on the phone previously, involve a huge partnership effort. And as I think it was Bridget that mentioned earlier, that partnerships are really the key to the Fish and Wildlife Service accomplishing our on-the-ground conservation efforts. Wildlife and frankly, the American public don't recognize our boundaries so well. But what they do recognize is when the habitat exists and where the conservation measures are in place to protect them. And so to answer the question, implementation and continued work with the Fish and Wildlife Service and the Refuge System in particular moving forward is going to be a huge part of that effort.
Great, thanks. And just a technical note, we may or may not be having technical problems with attendees who work in the Fish and Wildlife Service to be able to use the chat window. So if you have a critical question, feel free to send me an email at michael_Gale, G-A-L-E, at fws.gov, and I'll read it from my BlackBerry. So another process question, maybe this is for Rebecca. How are the questions and comments posted on americaswildlife.org being addressed? And a somewhat related question, maybe to open it to the panel, how will success in accomplishing parts of the vision be measured, and over what time frame will results be gauged?
Absolutely, two great and big questions. I mentioned earlier that the core teams are meeting this week. They have been incredibly active on the website. We have been giving them the comments and the bold ideas as they come in for them to take a look at, to start thinking about. And they're kind of doing that assessment this week. And for any folks who have met in the past couple of days, in just a second, you can feel free to talk about kind of what your teams are talking about or what you're doing. All of the comments will be pulled out of the website. We are also accepting comments at comment@americaswildlife.org, and those comments will be extracted. Every comment that we received will be consolidated into kind of a packaged bundle. The core teams are looking at those and providing feedback and recommendations, and ultimately service leadership, refuge system leadership will be looking at those shortly after the close of the comment period and making decisions that moves us toward the draft that we will use at our conference in July about the future of the National Wildlife Refuge System. And you can stay tuned at americaswildlife.org to get more information about the online conference that you can participate in. But that's kind of how that's going to roll out, how we're looking at comments. And the second part of the question was kind of the implementation schedule. I think the steering committee is currently working on that. They're thinking about different models that we can use for implementation teams and how to establish those. When we get closer to July, we'll probably have more firm time frames, but there will be definite goals and objectives that are established with timelines that are set as we move into the implementation phase of this process. But a couple of the teams met yesterday maybe. I think leadership may have met, and the science team met. So Jose or Heather, how are things going this week? You guys starting to discuss comments?
Yeah, this is Heather, and yes, we did have a meeting yesterday actually, and I think it went well. We got quite a bit done, and what we decided to do actually was create a spreadsheet that we put up on a SharePoint site of all the different comments that have come in, and each team member has had the opportunity to kind of go through there and provide some sort of a response to those comments. So we are definitely taking it very seriously, and we're expected to provide our final draft of our responses by next week. So we're currently working on that now, but lots of good comments, and we definitely are taking them seriously.
This is Jose, and yeah, I would echo those same words. We had a bit of a reprieve, and at the beginning of this effort, there was a lot of work going into crafting the original the draft document or our chapters of it, and moving it forward, and then sort of putting it out to the public and to employees to get input on. And we had that rest period, so to speak, monitoring the bold comments and our bold ideas and comments, etc. But now it's really time, and we had the same call yesterday. It's time to start taking those comments in and incorporating them where possible and considering them in the formulation of a revised chapter, so that it's ready to go for the conference in July.
Thanks, Jose. Well, I think we are running out of time. We are right up against our window for this webinar closing. So very quickly, I want to throw a question out to everyone on the panel. What is your personal vision for the National Wildlife Refuge System?
Okay, I'll try to keep it short and simple. But my personal vision, I think what we need to be successful, and like I said, I'll keep it very short and simple. I just think we need a couple things. I think we need to utilize our partners, friends groups, keep stakeholders involved, just everyone, let them know what's going on. And the social media like we've used to this process may be a great opportunity to really do that and just let our communities know what's going on and just get as much help as we can from friends groups and organizations like that. And the other thing is really look from a landscape level perspective on things, and not manage refuges as little islands anymore, but really take a big look. And I know these aren't new ideas. I know we've been doing these. I just think to be successful, more successful, and be as efficient as possible, we need to do a better job, and we can do a better job of doing both those things. And lastly, my vision would include support for training and leadership opportunities for those who want it and those who have proven themselves. I've been fortunate enough in my region and at my station to get some great opportunities early in my career. And I just think, if all stations did what Back Bay does, my station, I think we'd create a large number of really strong conservation leaders that would really benefit the refuge system and the Fish and Wildlife Service and really just conservation in general.
Thanks, Brian. Who else has a personal vision?
This is Bridget. I have kind of a twofold vision. Our National Wildlife Refuge System protects wildlife in two forms. We do it directly on the ground by preserving and enhancing and restoring habitats using the best science and a landscape perspective. But we also do it indirectly by connecting people with nature to ensure that our species preservation mission will continue to be a priority for the American people.
Thanks, Bridget. Very, very clear, concise, and strong vision. Thank you. Noah, did you have something?
Sure, I can go. So this is just Noah's personal opinion. represent the core teams of the Fish and Wildlife Service, but it's my vision that the refuge system would set a few clear priorities that all work towards improving the biological integrity of the places we love and manage, and that we measure whether we are improving that integrity, and that all the conservation goals that we set to achieve our integrity goals are structured to actually require cooperation from our partners in order to be realized. So if our goals don't require partners to be achieved, then I think we've either got the wrong goals, we're not thinking big enough, or our attempted collaborations will probably fail. So my vision has an emphasis on biological integrity, managing for it, and determining whether we're doing it or not, and setting goals for the refuge system that require collaborations to be achieved. In other words, I need you to achieve my goals, and you need me to achieve your goals. And if we do that and set goals in that way, I think we'll be successful.
That's great, Noah. Thanks. Heather or Jose?
Heather, I have one as well.
Great.
I just really think that with all the different conservation challenges that we're facing today, that there's really never been a more important time to craft the new vision for the National Wildlife Refuge System. So I'm really glad that we're having this opportunity. I think that we need to be thinking well into the future and at the landscape level in order to continue to sustain and recover our most precious natural resources. Really, none of this will be possible without the backing of the American public and support of all of our partners, so I think that we must continue to work with them at every opportunity possible to find solutions to the pressing challenges that we're facing. And I think overall I envision a national wildlife refuge system that's designed and administered across jurisdictional boundaries and planned for at all relevant spatial scales, where actions are based on a commitment to a culture of scientific excellence, and a system that becomes a model for how conservation is implemented across the globe, where conservation, nature, and fostering the people's connections to these special places comes first.
Excellent, Heather. Jose, you're the last one. Do you have a personal vision for the refuge system?
I do, in fact, and it's pretty simple. It's that national wildlife refuges continue to be an integral part of this tremendous network of public lands that we collectively refer to as America's Great Outdoors, and that they continue to be valued and supported by the American public.
Thank you. Well, I just want to thank everybody. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today, both here and on the phone. Thank you all viewers for joining us, for taking time out of your day, for your thoughts, your questions, and really for your interest in this process, Conserving the Future. We really hope that you've enjoyed today's broadcast, and I hope that you have gotten the message that you still have time to make your voice heard. Make sure you visit americaswildlife.org and get your comments and bold ideas there by Friday, Earth Day, April 22nd. And just to reiterate, after the close of the comment period, comments and bold ideas will be consolidated and analyzed and will be used to help inform revisions to the document as we prepare for the conference. More information will be coming about the online conference at americaswildlife.org, so make sure you stay tuned there for all of those great options that Michael showed us earlier. We're going to close the webinar today with a brief message from Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge that will encourage you to make your bold ideas heard at americaswildlife.org. Again, thank you. Enjoy the message from Santa Ana, and have a great afternoon. And as a quick note, as we pull up Santa Ana's message, this webinar will be available. You'll receive an email about where it's being posted, but we'll also send that to folks who are not available to join us today and participate in that. So look for that, and feel free to share it with others who aren't able to be with us. Thanks. Now a note from Santa Ana.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is crafting a new vision for the National Wildlife Refuge System, and we want you to be a part of this exciting process.
Refuges are special places where wildlife comes first. Refuges are places for people to connect with wildlife.
places that help ensure that our country's wildlife will be enjoyed by future generations.
We're talking about the future of conservation.
We need your best and boldest ideas for the National Wildlife Refuge. We want hunters, anglers, birders, outdoor educators, nature photographers, conservation groups, students, and fans of the outdoors to join our discussion as we craft the vision for the future. Here's how. Go to www.americaswildlife.org and go wild.
Join the conversation with people who share your love of the wild. People have something to say about the future of conservation. People who care about National Wildlife Refuges.
We need your ideas and comments by April 22nd. That's Earth Day.
The best and boldest ideas will be shared with the service's top leaders and put forth at a national conference this summer in Madison, Wisconsin.
Join us as we chart a course for the future. It's all about the future of wildlife conservation. Join us.
Join us.
Join us. Join us.
Join us!